Good morning, everyone. I am Earl P. Quesada, the first reporter for the Chapter 10 Assessment for Education. So, what word comes to mind first when you think about the word school? If the word test came to mind, it would certainly be understandable. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of tests are administered to students over the course of their academic career. Included are teacher-made tests, stated mandated tests, psychologists recommended tests, and assorted other tests. Nganong daghan man kay test? Next is the role of testing in assessment in education. Educators are interested in answers to diverse questions as a student progresses through school. A small sampling of those questions might be: how will have students learn and master the subject matter they were taught? To what extent are students able to apply what they have learned to novel circumstances and situations? Which students have demonstrated the ability or skill necessary to move on the next level of learning? Which students have demonstrated the ability or skill necessary for independent living? What are the challenges or obstacles that are preventing an individual students from meeting educational objectives, and how can those obstacles best be overcome? How effective are teachers in assisting a students to master a specific curriculum goals? Do passing test scores on a curriculum-specific test genuinely affect the fact that the test taker have mastered the curriculum? Do failing test scores on a curriculum-specific test really reflect the fact that the test taker have not mastered the content of the curriculum? So, in recent years, many such questions have been raised with regard to the state's kindergarten to 12th grade or K-12 educational system. Some observe cite generally disappointing answers to such questions. Blame for such dubious educational outcomes has been placed by many on federal legislation, such as No Child Left Behind or NCLB legislation. Perhaps the most vocal outcries had been reserved for NCLB as whole, but certain provisions of NCLB, such as its insistence that educational progress be gauged by the standardized test.
The case for and against educational testing in the schools. Standardized testing has ignited a national debate in the last few years or decades, and many parents feel understandably concerned about their children being judged on the basis of tests that, in some cases, don't seem to reliably correlate with actual learning or with successful college and career outcomes. Now, there are pros and cons about this matter. One of the pros is that standardized tests can help schools evaluate progress. Assessment data is also useful for year-over-year internal comparisons. We compare data over a number of years to find trends, and then trace any changes back to their source. If the math scores of a 4th grade student suddenly jump, we want to identify what change led to the improved performance and how we can continue to implement this within our curriculum. We're also able to use a student's historical assessment data to monitor their progress and uncover any challenges they may need to overcome, as well as identify places where they have already improved and excelled. Now, test scores can impact confidence. A big disadvantage of the standardized testing is that it's easy to interpret a student's score as the sole judgment of that student's ability. We're constantly emphasizing here at our school that the number is only one point of data within an array of internal assessments across many subject areas that provides us with information on a student's learning progress. There are many cases where students have demonstrated clear understanding within a subject or concepts through various assessments, but are not really skilled at taking multiple choices tests. Nevertheless, it can be hard on a student if they feel that they didn't perform as well as they'd like. In worst case scenarios, instead of determining the entire picture of learning through a review of all assessment data with their teachers, a student might, determine their success based on a standardized test score that is taken once a year. The Common Core State Standards. The Common Core is a set of academic standards for what every student is expected to learn in each grade level, from kindergarten through high school. They cover math and English language arts. To complement the release of the CCSS, or the Common Core State Standards, in March of 2010, the United States Department of Education offered groups of 15 or more states, referred to as consortia, close to $400 million in grant money to develop a new K-12 tests to be aligned with CCSS. By September of 2010, the funds had been awarded to two consortia, one known as the PARCC, or the Partnership of the Assessment of Readiness of College and Careers, and the other known as the Smarter Balance, or the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium Point 1. Both of these were assigned the task of developing a comprehensive assessment system that was qualitatively different in many ways than anything that had preceded it.
Next is the response to intervention or ITI. Background. In the mid-1970s, the federal mandate to identify and assist children with learning problems defined a learning disability as well as severe discrepancy between achievement and intellectual ability.
So for example, ang teacher nagpabasa siya o kanang story about the students. After niya magpabasa sa story is mag-answer sila og 10 question related sa story. So pag checking sa teacher, na-find out niya nga gamay score ang iyang isa ka estudyante. Then later on, na-find out niya na naadi ay difficulties in reading ang students. So, maotto, nangita siya intervention, ibasahan niya ang estudyante. Then, ang student naminaw pud sa iyahang story. Then, after niya pag-story, gipaansiran niya ang students o katong napulo ka question na related sa story. And, students, nag-answer siya. So, na-shock ang teacher kinansiran tanan sa estudyante ang 10 ka question na related sa story. So, ang problema lang siya or ang conclusion sa anin na example kay dili kabalo mo basa ang estudyante, maong gamiton na intervention kay tudluan ang bata unsaon pagbasa. So, mao to siya na example, guys. So, next is for decades,
thereafter a specific learning disability or SLD was diagnosed if a significant discrepancy existed between the child measured intellectual ability, usually on an intelligence test, and the level of achievement that could reasonably be expected from the child in one or more areas. Na diriya ang oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading skill, reading comprehension, mathematic calculation, and mathematic reasoning. However, all of that changed with a new definition of SLD or specific learning disability and new diagnostic guideline. A specific learning disability is a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, which disorder may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, write, read, spell, or do mathematical calculation.
The Common Core controversy. For years now, the Common Core state standards have been at the center of the national controversy over public education. Supporters say that the standards being used in most states will improve public education, raising the standards that had formerly been used in most states. But critics say otherwise. Earlier this year, for example, for more than 100 education researchers in California collectively issued a research brief saying that there is no compelling evidence that the Common Core state standards will improve the quality of education for children or close the achievement gap. They also labeled new Common Core standardized tests as lacking validity, reliability, and fairness.
Based of the definition presented on the federal-funded website of the National Center of the Response to Intervention, we may define the response to intervention model as a multi-level prevention framework applied in the educational setting that is designed to maximize students' achievement through the use of the data that identifies students at risk for poor learning outcomes combined with the evidence-based intervention in teaching that is adjusted on the basis of the student's responsiveness. A simpler description of this model of teaching and assessment is: A. A teacher provides evidence-based instruction. B. Students' learning of that instruction is regularly evaluated. C. Intervention, if required, occurs in some form of appropriate adjustment in the instruction. D. Revaluation of learning takes place. And E. Intervention and a reassessment occur as necessary. Implementing RTI. Owing at least in a part to the federal mandate, the RTI-related literature has been burgeoning still because the law left implementation of RTI to the state and school districts. Many important questions remain regarding exactly how RTI is to be implemented. Some state and school districts employ what has been referred to as the problem-solving model. So, problem-solving refers to the use of intervention tailored to students' individual needs that are selected by a multidisciplinary team of school professionals. Problem-solving model. By contrast, other state and school districts rely more on a more general intervention policy, one selected by the school administration and designed to address the needs of multiple students. Some schools have put in place a hybrid of these two approaches. That is, some standard school policy is applied to all students, but there are provisions to allow for the problem-solving approach with certain students under certain conditions. So, many critical questions remain regarding exactly how RTI is to be implemented. Some of these questions include: what criteria should be used in moving students from one level to the another in the multi-level model? What tests should be used to assess learning in response to intervention? What are the respective rules of school personnel such as classroom teachers, school psychologists, reading teachers, and guidance counselor in the implementing RTI?
Dynamic assessment. Dynamic assessment is used in educational settings to access a child's ability to profit from instruction. It is based on the educational theories of Lev Vygotsky, who proposed that children learn best when the teaching figure is instructing the child on how to do something within the child's zone of proximal development, and learning is scaffolded. The theoretical underpinnings of this approach can be traced to the work of Pudov, 1967 to 1987, Frustein, 1977 to 1981, and Vygotsky in 1978. Dynamic assessment seeks to identify the skills that an individual child possesses as well as their learning potential. Lev Semyonovich Vygotsky, 1896 to 1934. Now viewed as a celebrated researcher in the history of Soviet psychology and a present-day influence in American education and psychology, Vygotsky was hardly celebrated in his homeland during his lifetime. He labored under strict government regulation and censorship and widespread anti-Semitism. Etkin, 1994. He worked for very little pay, lived in the basement of the institute in which he worked on, and suffered ill health, succumbing at the age of 38 for years of living in tuberculosis. Although his political views were Marxist, he was hardly embraced by the authorities. In the end, his works were banned by the government, and as Zinchenko, 2007, put in, he was lucky to have managed to die in his own bed. Vygotsky's impact on the behavioral science community will be long felt years after the relatively brief decade or so that his psychology laboratory was active. His published writings stimulated thought in diverse fields, including educational psychology, developmental psychology, and physiological psychology. A.R. Luria was a contemporary of Vygotsky, and Vygotsky was believed to have had a great influence in Luria's thinking. In his own autobiography, Luria referred to Vygotsky as a genius.
Next is the achievement test. Achievement tests are designed to measure accomplishment. An achievement test for a first grader might have as its subject matter the English language alphabet, whereas sa ang mga achievement for the college, student might contain questions relating to principle of psychological assessment. In short, achievement tests are designed to measure the degree of learning that has taken place as a result of exposure to relatively defined learning experiences. So, ang achievement test is an exam designed to assess how much knowledge a person has in a certain area, topics, or subtopics. So, naay duha ka branch ang achievement test. First is the measure of general achievement. Measure of general achievement may survey learning in one or more academic areas. Tests that cover a number of academic areas are typically divided into several subtests and are referred to as achievement batteries, such as battery may be individual administered or group administered. For example, dili lang kay isang kaya niyang i-measure kung tayo pwede math, science, language, uban pa. Maong general siya kay dagan manggod siya pwede na i-measure. Next is the measure of achievement in specific subject areas. Whereas achievement batteries tend to be standardized instruments, most measure of achievement in specific subject areas are teacher-made tests. Every time a teacher gives a quiz, a test, or a final examination in a course, a test in a specific subject area has been created. Still, there are a number of standardized instruments designed to gauge achievement in specific areas. For example, isa ka area lang siya i-measure. Kung tahay, science, Sa science yun niya i-measure nimo kung asa taman ang iyang knowledge about science.
Curriculum-based assessment, or CBA, is an evaluation process that makes use of academic content selected directly from the material taught. This is a form of a criterion reference assessment that connects evaluation with instructional programs by informing teachers of both student progress and learning challenges. Examples of CBA strategies and procedures include miscue and error analysis to assess issues in reading such as additions, substitutions, omissions, reversals, or reading words not displayed in a text. Curriculum-based measurement, or CBM, is a method that teachers use to find out how students are processing in basic academic areas such as math, reading, writing, and spelling. CBM can be helpful to parents because it provides current, week-by-week information on the progress their children are making. This is an example of curriculum-based measurement, or CBM.